Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Energy Vampires. It's been a little while since my last upload, but I felt inspired today to talk about a subject that's very important, and that is slavery. Okay, so in this modern day, there are two kinds of slavery. There's blatantly obvious slavery, which is the worst kind. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. Okay, and then there is slavery that is very covert. Okay, it's slavery whereby the slaves are under the illusion that they're free, but they're not. And we'll talk more about that as well. Okay, so what about slavery in the old days? Well, let's go way back to the Bible times. Okay, so slavery then was perfectly acceptable. You could own slaves as property. People were property, and you could pass your slaves on to your children as an inheritance, and you could do as you wish with your slaves. I mean, if there were fellow Hebrew slaves, they were your slaves for 7 years, but there was a loophole whereby you could keep them longer or keep them forever. But I've talked about that in previous videos, and we'll not go too much into that. So that was the Bible times. So there was no secret of it. It was just a part of the time. It was part of the culture, and I don't condone it at all. Slavery, whether it was a long time ago or whether it's now, whether it's in the future, there's never any moral justification for slavery. It is wrong to own another human being as property and to exploit another human being for work and forced labour and what have you. Okay, but what about slavery today? Okay, let's talk about modern day slavery. Okay, because it's rife and it exists, and slavery was never abolished. Now, there are many people that think that slavery involves the sex trade, but it's not. The sex trade and sex trafficking is a very big thing that's going on, but that's not all that's going on. Forced labour is very rampant as well. In fact, 65% of the world's slaves are in forced labour. Okay? And here's a disturbing fact. If you eat shrimp, 90% of the companies that bring shrimp into the US, the shrimp is gathered by some type of forced labour to produce it. Okay, there's also in war there are children forced into being a soldier and having to kill. If you ask them, I'm sure they wouldn't voluntarily do this. Okay, so yeah, children is a part of modern day slavery as well. 1 in 4 children are a slave. Sorry, not 1 in 4 children. 1 in 4 slaves is a child. Big difference there in what I said. Certainly not 1 in 4 children. Yeah, 1 in 4 slaves happen to be children. Okay. The average cost of a slave is $90, would you believe? I mean, that's shocking, isn't it? Compare that to in 1809, when the average price of a slave was $40,000. Okay. 400,000 men and boys are being sexually exploited globally. So this is not just women in the sex trade, in the forced sex trade. Okay. So there are 21 million slaves globally in this world, and it's a $150 billion per year industry. It's highly profitable to traffickers. So slavery has not been abolished. It is still going on. Okay? And you know what's sad is that, really it's for us more fortunate folk that the slavery exists. Okay? Because it is to do with supply and demand. Okay? Now, I want to play a very small clip from a TV show called The Good Place. I highly recommend it because it's funny, it's great entertainment. It's all about heaven and hell. They call it The Good Place, The Bad Place. It's on Netflix. If you haven't watched it, you would enjoy it, and I highly recommend it. Okay, but I'm going to play a very small clip which will really kind of put things into perspective as to how we innocently live our lives, but not so innocently. Okay, we go about our daily lives well intentioned, thinking that everything is okay, and it's not okay. So let me just show you this very short clip from The Good Place.
Why don't we all sit down so I can fill the judge in on what we've learned? Your Honor, I once stood in front of you and said I thought there was something wrong with the point system. I finally know what it is. Life now is so complicated. It's impossible for anyone to be good enough for the good place. I know you don't like to learn too much about life on Earth to remain impartial, but these days just buying a tomato at a grocery store means that you are unwittingly supporting toxic pesticides, exploiting labor, contributing to global warming. Humans think that they're making one choice, but they're actually making dozens of choices they don't even know they're making.
So yeah, you see how from that clip, how we can go about our daily lives quite innocently, and there's consequences to even the innocent, well-intentioned things that we do, and the very mundane things that we do, the things that we buy. There was another clip in The Good Place where a man had bought a bunch of flowers for his mother, which was a good thing to do, but there were consequences that were far beyond the surface level. That the flowers were picked by a slave, and so it equaled minus points, right? So it's very interesting, and I couldn't find that clip, but if you watch The Good Place, you'll definitely come across it. There's definitely a very philosophical message behind that TV show, even though it's done in a very comedic, is that a word? Comedic? I don't know. But it's a comedy, and it's definitely educational, or thought-provoking rather, whilst at the same time entertaining. Okay, so how then, the big question, how then do we, because none of us want to think of, people being exploited for our Western world, first world, comfortable lives. No one wants that. Not if we're thinking people and we care and we realise that it's going on. Of course we want to eradicate it. So what's the best way to go about that? Well, I've been giving this some thought, and you can look up different companies to boycott. There's companies that are not ethical, they're not fair trade. Yeah, so you can boycott these, and you can watch what you buy and where you buy it. Okay, but you know what? There's an even simpler method, a much simpler method, and what that is as much as you possibly can, buy local, right? Keep everything that you do in your life local. That the people you're buying from, who's working, that the laws in that local place have like minimum wage requirements and comfortable working conditions by law, right? So buying local is the surest, least laborious way to combat this problem. And if everybody did that, then we address the supply and demand issue where slavery is concerned, right? Okay, so I want to talk now about your life, okay? About the life that you're living, and how much of a slave are you, right? Okay, now it's rather interesting to think about this, and I'm gonna expand right now. Okay, so I'm gonna make two pie charts right now. So I'm gonna do my time and my money. Now this is not my time and my money, right? But I'm doing as average as I possibly can. Okay, so let's enter names. Okay, so I've got to do sleep, okay, because we sleep and we work, okay, and we prepare for work. Now, I'm not covering weekends, right? Now, Saturday and Sunday is supposedly your time, right? Okay, but we do spend a lot of that time doing not what we want to do, but what we need to do, so far as getting in groceries, paying some bills, getting some things done, resting and recuperating, ready for the next week ahead. Alright, so we're not totally free on the weekends, but yes, the weekends are nice, I must admit. Okay, now, let's do the values. So we're going to do percentage. Now, we sleep for 33% of the day, of the 24 hours. Okay. We sleep, for 8 hours on average. Okay. And we also work for 33% of the day, about 8 hours. Okay. I've never used this tool before. Bit of trouble with it, not got it exact, but it's close enough. Okay. So let's have a look at what we got. So it's a good visual, right? So basically, the blue represents sleep. Now, sleep is a human need. You can't escape it. There's no getting out of it. Alright, so this is how much of your day is represented by blue, in which we're asleep. Okay? Now, the red represents work. Okay? And that's how much of the day, if the circle represents a 24-hour day, this is how much you work. So between sleep and work is pretty much most of your 24-hour day. Okay? And work is something we have to do as well. Okay? Okay, so the green represents leisure after we spend 10% of our time preparing for work. And when I say preparing for work, I mean getting ready for work, right? And commuting to work, if we're lucky. I know people personally that spend a ridiculous amount of time recruiting to and from work. Okay, so I mean, we're just working with an average here. So you can see how not much of your time is your own, unless you count sleep as your own time. But I don't. I think sleep is just something that we need. So if we were to take away that blue and we just look at these three pie segments here, the majority of our time in the day is spent working. Is it for us or isn't it? Well, let's have a look at the next chart that is going to be to do with your money. So when you're working and you're gathering money, you're getting your paycheck, what of that money is for you really and truly? Let's look at that. Okay, so let me just do a pie chart here. Alright, so I think the simplest way to do this is to break it into two parts, right? Rather than do the full breakdown and have like loads of variables, let's just look at it in two segments. Okay, so we got what the percentage of money that you need to live, okay, just for the privilege of living, and then what's left over for luxuries, which we call disposable income. Okay, so according to my pie chart here, 80% is for living and 20% is your own after you live, and you've got a little bit left over for some of life's luxuries. Now, I think that's a bit generous, 20%. I think that a lot of people watching this video will think, wow, I would be lucky to have 20% of my income as disposable income. Some people have more. It varies from person to person, but that's really what we're looking at. So what does that mean? That means that our working lives, okay, is spent really to give back, alright, because we're paying for the roof that's over our heads, we're paying for the power, the energy and the utilities that come into our home, okay, and we're giving all that money back, okay, and we are putting fuel into our vehicles to get to work. If you take public transport, it's the same thing, you're putting money into that. And why? So that you can continue working until you retire. When you're very old, well, not very old, but certainly old enough to be past your prime and enjoy life to its max in your prime. Okay, so you're working from, the beginning of your prime to the end of your prime, and you're taking a big chunk of your day just to pay 80% of your income back out, right, to the rich, okay? Now, the source of my figures comes from thebalance.com. I'm just looking here on Google. You can see it right here. And it says, many experts say your necessities, rent or mortgage payment, food, taxes, okay, should account for only 50% of your budget, whilst discretionary spending should account for 30% or less. The remaining 20% should be used for other financial goals such as paying off debt. Well, there you go. So it's not even totally disposable income, saving or investing, okay? So if you're in debt, then you don't even have the luxury of utilizing that money for fun things, okay? Now again, I'll say it, 80% of the money that you earn for the time that you exchange for money, okay, is paying for you to keep going, to get a good night's sleep, and to get back there the next day and clock in for another day, another dollar, okay? And then, you know, you're spending your money on enabling yourself to go back in the next day and go back in the next day and go back in the next day. And all the while you're paying to get there. I mean, okay, this is generalizations because some of you have got good jobs that you're able to get your travel expenses paid, you know? So, you know, we can't speak for everyone on the planet. I'm just making a very general thing. I'm just trying to give an assessment, a general assessment as to where most people might be at so far as like the modern day. Now, in another video, I'm going to talk about a solution to live smarter and to have more freedom. Okay, that's the big keyword right here, is freedom. We want to get out of this rat race. We want to get out of this treadmill, this hamster wheel, right? And have more freedom, right? So we can call more of our lives our own, right? And there's no time to go into that in this video, but I certainly will be covering it in a future video. So if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel and you'll get updates of upcoming videos that I'm going to do. And thank you very much for listening, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.